to be with us so early in the morning. And apologies for the 2 minutes delay in having you enter the room. If you could give us just another 3 minutes at most. It's still early and we expect a few more persons who we have invited to join us. So we won't delay you beyond another 3 minutes. Thank you. Right, so good morning again, and apologies for the 5 minutes delay. Welcome all to this consultation workshop as we advance towards the development of a Caribbean Artificial Intelligence Policy Roadmap, an initiative of the UNESCO Cluster Office for the Caribbean and the Broadcasting Commission of Jamaica, with the support of UNESCO's Information for All program. Several of you would have attended the 2 preliminary webinars, which had been organized to discuss artificial intelligence and what it portends for the Caribbean. And we thank you for that contribution. It has taken us to this point where we have in draft a policy brief, and we now want to refine that policy brief. So we have invited select individuals to get your feedback and to add value to what is already a significant body of work. We should spare a thought as well for our colleagues in St. Vincent and the Caribbean and the East, St. Vincent and the Grenadines and the Eastern Caribbean, some of whom would have joined us this morning. If this were not a virtual meeting, it would have been postponed, no doubt, because we either wouldn't be flying there or they wouldn't be flying here. So sometimes there's a glass half full when we look at the digital transition that has taken place in most unfortunate circumstances of a pandemic which seems bent and mimicking the Black Death of the 14th century. But here we are as human beings prevailing, which emphasizes the human centricity of our approach to AI for development. Having said that, it is now my great pleasure to introduce one of the hardest working UNESCO representatives in this region. And she's the advisor for communication and information, and one of the pillars behind this initiative, Miss Isabel Vieira.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Cordell, for that kind introduction. Good morning. On behalf of the UNESCO of United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, UNESCO, thank you to each and every one of you for being here with us today. Our thoughts are with the people of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. We are very pleased to be able to welcome those of you that have been with us before, as well as those who are new to the Caribbean Artificial Intelligence Initiative. I would like to express my sincere appreciation to all of you who generously are devoting your time to contributing to this important process. In particular, we would like to thank the Broadcasting Commission of Jamaica and his Executive Director, Mr. Cordell Green, and his colleagues for putting this event together and allowing it to become a success. Today marks our third year since the UNESCO Cluster Office for the Caribbean approved a specific work plan to start working directly on artificial intelligence matters in the Caribbean, and we are proud to have advanced and learned so much during this process and to be able to be celebrating this workshop today. The rapid introduction and uptake of artificial intelligence give it great potential to address some of the most pressing development challenges of the Caribbean small island developing states. AI leads at the same time, it can cause other disruptive socioeconomic effects. This leads to the need of putting in place plans and policies that addresses the role, impact, and ethics behind AI in relation to the Caribbean seas that are faced with specific development challenges and vulnerabilities. In today's gathering, we will focus on discussing and collecting your ideas, inputs, suggestions, and comments as regards to the Caribbean Artificial Intelligence Draft Policy Roadmap. The document, which has been shared with you previous to our meeting to facilitate the discussion, is based on the research conducted as well as on the outputs from the online activities that have been taking place since December 2020. Well, I really don't want to take too much of your time and will rather leave as much time as possible for the interesting and important discussions that will take place today and that will contribute and enrich and fine-tune the draft policy roadmap. This is an important step for us here in the Caribbean. I am sure that today we will all enjoy a fruitful, engaging, and enriching meeting, and a very warm welcome to each and every one of you. And a big thanks for engaging with UNESCO and BCJ in this effort. Thank you.
Well, better I go sleep so I can have some energy for this test.
No, not yet. It's been a week since you got me and I have a question.
Aren't you the built-in assistant? You're here to help me.
I just want to know where I come from. The other machines around the house said I'm AI, but I'm not sure what that means.
I was just reading up on that, you know. You're lucky to have me guiding you.
Oh, I definitely am. So tell me more about this AI.
Well, iBot, artificial intelligence or AI has many definitions. But in a nutshell, it is about machines that can learn and make decisions that would normally be left to humans. Most of us humans use it in our everyday lives. Once we have a smart device like a phone or a tablet, chances are we're using AI. Remember how I searched for a dress earlier, and by the time I go on Instagram, I saw ads for shoes to go with it. Yep, that's AI.
So we are involved in everything. I'm worried though. Smart Stove told me that AI could do bad things like take away jobs from humans and make wrong decisions that hurt you. I can't believe we'd ever do that.
Ah, yes, that can sometimes be true. For example, sometimes AI will make decisions like denying a loan or medical attention based on gender, race, or even where a person lives. This is what we call algorithmic bias. But it is humans who created AI, and we must ensure we provide you with the right information so you can make better decisions and not discriminate against people based on their race, gender, and things like that. When we give you the correct programming and rules to help you make right decisions, we're practicing what's known as AI ethics. We can't leave everything up to you, like me getting shoe suggestions after searching for the dress. Yes, I wanted shoes, but sometimes when AI collects information about people, they don't know it is happening and what the information is being used for. This invades our privacy, and not everyone is so welcoming of their information being used unless they give their permission.
Oh wow! This is good to know as a new bot. So, no matter how smart we become, humans should always have a say about our decisions, right?
Yes, iBot, the AI in you mimics the human brain, but it can never be human and have human emotions.
I am learning so much from you. Tell me more.
Think of AI as your family members, robots and hardware devices on your mom's side, and software-based operations like voice assistants from your father's side, and data would be like your cousins. So let's see. Here in the Caribbean, we can use your family in agriculture. A farmer can be in his house and use AI to check on livestock and crops. He can monitor food and water intake for his cattle, keep track of livestock's health, and look for diseases even before severe symptoms appear. Gather data to look at fertilization and water quality. Get information about plant diseases and plant or soil deficiencies with 98% effectiveness using only pictures. All these things improve crop yields and help produce healthier livestock. And then even healthcare. You know I want to be a doctor, right? So this is my area. The other day when Dudley was fiddling with his watch, you know it's his blood pressure monitor he was checking? Yes! Things like smartwatches can check your heart rate and pressure levels. Can you imagine what doctors can do with that real-time info? How they can help people? Plus, I also read that when doctors work with AI, it makes operations 98% accurate. Can you believe that?
Wow! This is exciting. I love that we can collaborate with humans for good.
The other day, Mr. Williams, who runs the supermarket, told me that his AI tools told him to restock 500 banana chips, but he was thinking to change brands, so he only got 200 until the new shipment arrived. Now, AI wouldn't have known that, so it's always good when us humans and you AI work together.
We were talking for so long. It's now way past the usual bedtime. I think we can pause for tonight.
Ha! Look how you learned my bedtime. That is AI.
Well, that video certainly wasn't you. Most of you on this call, you're not the audience, but we do recognize that we're embarking on this initiative when, apart from the realities about AI itself, one of the most pressing gaps in the digital economy and society to which we're transitioning is this huge information asymmetry. How many people are engaging with AI and are not aware of it or just don't know what it portends. So this video is really touching at the rudimentary level and will be used to help with lifting awareness. So thank you, Isabel, for your opening remarks. And it's now my pleasure to hand over to Erica Simmons, who is the Executive Director of the Center for Advanced Manufacturing at the Caribbean Maritime University and the Chair of the IEEE Jamaica chapter. And Erica will be leading this workshop. Good morning, Erica.
Good morning, Mr. Green. Good morning, Miss Isabel, and all the participants on the call today. It's my pleasure to be here with you today. And we are going to have a very interactive session over the next 30 to 45 minutes, where we will review our roadmap. And as was shared earlier, the outcome of this roadmap was we got the outcome due to a series of consultations that we did in December and in January. So I'm going to share my screen and show you what we have so far. And I'm going to ask that throughout this presentation, there will be an opportunity for you, we'll pause, and there'll be an opportunity for you to comment. There also, you can raise your hand and also speak. There will also be a passive way to participate. We'll have some links to some forms, open-ended questions so that you can add your feedback. Okay, very exciting. We've got our consultation going and we have taken all of that and boiled it down into some important concepts. There is a 50-page paper that you could read, but this, what we're gonna go through today is really the essence of the paper. And we are going to start though with some assumptions. So for the purpose of developing this roadmap, we made the following assumptions. And these assumptions were made from our consultations, the feedback that we were getting. So I will let you read through this list, but I will just highlight a few important ones. As our commercial just told us, we are going to assume that human creativity is inextricably linked to the Caribbean and our identity here, our economic viability, and our sustainable development. So our creativity is really core to who we are here in the Caribbean, and that we know that AI is a product of human creativity. We would like our AI in the region to be of service to humanity, and we do recognize the transformative nature of this technology being both an industry sector and horizontally touching all sectors. The consultations also came out and said that we wanted to have AI that was inclusive, fair, transparent, and accountable in the region. We also agreed that AI must be regulated and that AI rights cannot supersede human rights. We acknowledge that AI is inevitable and it's the most important technology of our century, and that we are our data. We also acknowledge that bias is everywhere in AI. It is a product of the development of this technology. Many of the experts in our consultations also stressed that data rights will be the civil rights of the 21st century. We will fight over ownership and access to our data and information. And we did also acknowledge that we've got some infrastructure improvements to do in the region and that we have to educate and train. And so the commercial and the literacy campaign that we are going to need to do in the Caribbean is essential. And we see Mr. Green and the Broadcasting Commission has already started. Okay, so those are our large assumptions. Those assumptions then came up with our framework. So we have a map that talks about our principles, which is an outcome of all of our discussions. We talk about some guidelines, some areas to develop policy. And we talk very specifically about some things that we would want to do. So we are going to go line item by line item on each one of these principles and have a discussion. So let's talk about the top 6 principles for the Caribbean AI Policy Roadmap as a result of the discussions. We talked about AI being helping with our resiliency in the region, that we have to make sure that we have governance over AI being deployed in the region. We have to enable our transformation here in the region with AI. That is going to mean that we are going to have to upskill our region, our people in the region. And we will talk specifically about women and youth and what we have to do to make sure that they're definitely a part of our future. We talked about our uniqueness as a region, our Caribbean region, and that we want to make sure that that is preserved at all costs. We don't want to be replaced by AI. We don't want our culture to be taken by AI. And that we have to work on our sustainability for the region. We have yet to reach our development goals. So we're going to look a little bit about how AI is going to help us with our global goals and our sustainability as a region. So based on the research that we did, the feedback that we got from each of our consultation sessions, these are the 6 principles for the Caribbean region. I want to stop here and open it up to the audience to determine if you have any feedback on these principles. Did we leave anything off that we needed to focus on very specifically? And remember, we're going to go a line item by line item, and each one of these principles, for example, will go down into a level of detail and you'll get to actually really give some feedback. But at a high level, what are we thinking about these principles, these 6 principles? I'll welcome an open discussion now. If you would like to raise your hand, maybe we could take 1 or 2 people. I will ask LaToya also to drop our feedback link into our chat. You're welcome to also give your feedback on the form as well. But is there anyone that would like to have a high-level feedback on these 6 principles?
No one yet, Erica.
Okay. All right, we'll keep going. I'm sure you'll have more. You'll have more to talk about as we get deeper into each one of these sessions, in each one of these topics. Okay, so when we talk about resiliency and using artificial intelligence for resiliency, I want you to think about our challenges that we're having with climate change here in the region. And we want to look at how we can use AI for disaster mitigation, for resource management. How are we going to capture all this data about our climate? And how are we going to use it to predict different events? And if we're able to do that, we are going to be looking at saving lives, minimizing the risk to our economies, improving our responsiveness to climate changes. We have a big topic, which is called decarbonization, which is on our agenda now. And if we focus on applying AI in some of these areas, we can assist with that. We need to really bolster up our food security. That was a topic that we spoke about in our consultations. We have a lot of data and information already out here, potentially about our climate in the region. We need to look to determine whether or not it's in the right format for us to be able to use it for predictive analytics. So I wanted to give some specific examples for the policymakers, the different people that are responsible for this area, so that you can begin to think about, if you're talking about disaster mitigation and we're working on this resiliency principle, we'll want to look at enabling things like early warning systems. So making sure that we can have policies around using AI for early warning systems. Trouble spot monitoring. We just spoke about the brothers and sisters in St. Vincent. We know we have some volcanoes in our region. How could we use AI to be more proactive in monitoring those natural phenomena? And of course, we need education. We need to manage our resources, our natural resources better. And we have lots of natural resources in the regions. We've got oceans, we've got rivers, we have ports. And we need to play our part here in the region on monitoring our carbon emissions and dealing with carbon. So how would we use AI and develop policies, develop programs that would be targeted at making sure we can manage our resources better?
Can we comment at this stage?
Yes, please. Yes.
Okay. I am from Dominica, and we experienced over 2 years a storm and then a hurricane. Mm-hmm. And also, we are also subject to possibly volcanoes and earthquakes. Mm-hmm. So we have a stake in assuring that our country is very resilient. And led by our Prime Minister, Honorable Roosevelt Skerrit, we developed what is called a resiliency framework. Okay. To try to encourage everybody to be able to bounce back out of, adversity. Mm-hmm. Now, you mentioned 1 or 2 provisions, and supply chain in terms of food security was one of them. Mm-hmm. Also, organizing your agriculture to be able to have food in storage, plus have food that you can access even after, a storm or a hurricane or a catastrophic event. Mm-hmm. But we also concentrated on in preventing catastrophe, over in the event of future events, that we should adopt standards in terms of how we construct infrastructure, how we construct shelter, housing, to be able to deal with these catastrophic events, so that it doesn't become, we save lives, and also be able to continue living. Now, mitigation is good, but those of us who went through that Hurricane Maria, the passage of the hurricane was the easy part. Having a life after that in the first week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, or a month was much worse than the hurricane itself, right? So I think in terms of resiliency, we need to focus on things like ensuring that communication can come back up immediately after the hurricane, so that we can communicate with our loved ones who are overseas, or with our comrades and friends who are overseas and who would like to help. Also, as I say, supply chain distribution of food. We found that everybody traveled from the rural areas into the central capital looking for food. Mm-hmm. And it was after about a couple of days, we were able to reconcile that an opportunity existed by sending helicopters with food to the countrysides to prevent people from having to trek 30 miles, 20 miles, just to come to town looking for food and to prevent looting in the capital. So a number of these things could be enhanced by AI, you know, even in terms of protecting our road networks, you know, using AI to survey terrain where roads could best be planned and constructed. Also, how you place water lines, you know, underground or wherever, so that it doesn't experience disruption and you will always have water. Also, even adoption of, let's say, provisions of energy like provision of, let's say, electricity by using solar deployed in mobile containers with solar panels and with, you know, batteries and generators, and also, you know, reverse osmosis machines close to rivers for providing water. You know, so there were a number of issues that taught us how to deal with AI. Also in our city, in our critical areas like the hospitals, the government, the service providers of telecommunications, you know, decisions were made and policy established to place a lot of our, you know, conveyance systems, you know, our wires and all these things underground to prevent them from damage. You know, so that was our experience, and that would be our contribution to how to undertake resiliency.
Wonderful, Mr. Shillingford. Those were all excellent recommendations, and I have been taking notes on everything that you've said. I will also reach out to you perhaps after this to make sure that we can leverage your resiliency framework that you've already created. We want to make sure we get some of this stuff into our roadmap as well.
Yeah.
Erica, we have Isabel's hand raised.
Isabel, yes, please.
Thank you. Erica, congrats, a great start. And I'm already very enthusiastic about what's coming later. So just a small comment about, I agree with what my, the first participant expressed. And I would like to also refer to the need to include a rapid recovery of broadcast media and online media also in the case of disaster situations. The use of radio should be mentioned also, even the amateur radio that are so useful during disaster situation.
Thank you very much for that, Isabel. Very important medium that we could see how we can use AI to get that back up. Thank you very much for that.
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
I'm thinking, Erica, based on the comments, that we may have to get just a little bit granular with the disaster management component, because I'm hearing about emergency resources, the rationalization, the allocation, the distribution. And I think because it's a roadmap, it's embedded there, I think, in the disaster management, but getting a bit granular, I think, would help.
Wonderful, that's noted, Mr. Green. And we'll add to the disaster area on this and build it out a lot more. Thank you so much. And also, if you have any other comments, please click the link and you can passively also input into this particular area. We're gonna keep going because we have 6 large areas. And as you can imagine, the next area is huge. It's our governance area. So let's go to governance. and determine what are we doing in this area of governance, because everybody's talking about the risks associated with artificial intelligence. So at the high level.
Erica, sorry.
Yes, ma'am.
Sorry. It's Isabel. Can I say something about the previous slide? It's about data management. Maybe we could include there the protection of the data. Not sure if when it's developed, it would be included, but the protection of that data is also a very important matter. Yeah. Even that AI presents sometimes a risk for gathering in the way that this data is managed, is gathered, but I think it should be also protected.
Okay, noted. And thank you for bringing that up. On data management as well, we are looking at, we have lots of historical information about weather patterns, and we have lots of historical information about what's happening in the region. This was focused more on how we take that data, make sure it's in a format, right, that can be interrogated and used by AI systems so that we can make these predictions, so that we can become better at looking at early warning systems. So it's really on this one to doing with our weather and climate data that we already have in the region. How can we take it and better utilize it so we can make those predictions? And I will note, we do need to make sure that we're doing it in a way that is protective of privacy and will not reveal information about the people that are collecting it. Okay, so let's go to governance. As I said, this section is big, and it needs to be, because this is the area where we're kind of talking about all of the harms that AI is doing. So let's go through high level, the areas here, and then we can go down one by one. So we have to have ethics involved in our governance. We've also come to the fact that we need legislation around AI, and we talk about what that needs to be, right? Is it a law, soft law, whatever, we'll talk about that. We also need transparency, explainability, and accountability in the AI systems that we deploy here. It's a problem that all regions around the world are trying to tackle. So we want to make sure that any AI that comes in our region is transparent, explainable, and accountable. We want to make sure that the safety and well-being of people are protected. We want to make sure that AI is equitable in the region. And we want to make sure we focus also on women and youth and how we get them to be a part of creating this equity. You know, we need people from disadvantaged groups to be able to provide that feedback, to be able to erase blind spots that some people may have. We have to be a part of the advocacy, and this event and the whole entire Caribbean AI initiative by UNESCO is a wonderful example of advocacy. We now need to take this discussion regionally. We need to take the discussion globally and really become a part of these conversations that are happening. Okay, I think those are, okay. So let's go back and talk about ethics. We have come to the point where we have to establish common values and principles for how AI is going to operate in the region. And that's going to take more of a collaborative effort. We're going to have to go another step to agree on some common values. I think we've got the framework for them based on discussions, but we need to agree. We need to establish, I think, and we think, regional AI offices or networks, right? We should be developing here in the region, and we can follow the global lead, a code of conduct for developers. We need a technical code of conduct. I noticed, I wrote in the paper, and I wanted to just bring this up briefly. The software industry is one of those industries that really doesn't require licensing. Think about our medical industry, our law professionals. They have licensing, they have code of conduct that they're following, and you have to pass your bar examination, for example, to be a lawyer. Well, in order to develop AI solutions, there's really not that framework in our technical community. I sit on the IEEE, the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers, and we are coming up with a new reference standard called the P7000 series of standards. And I'm really happy about those standards because it is talking about things like the training data. What are standards regarding our training data? What are standards regarding transparency of these systems and explainability of these systems? So in this area of ethics, we want to really focus on how we develop ethical AI. In order to support that, we're going to need legislation. We need a framework here, a long-term policy, and I want us to be thinking in terms of at least 10 years, right? We're thinking, oh, you know, a lot of the things that are in this roadmap are so future. They're not here today. But I want us to future-proof this roadmap so that it has the stick-to-itiveness of at least a 10-year map. So we are going to develop a long-term policy. We need a 10-year policy. We want to address AI harms, responsibility and liability in our framework. And I know that Mr. Green, you've been working in this area as well. We had some debates. Are these soft laws that we want to put in place? Are there going to be more rigid laws? And we talked about the legislation because it's important for us not to stifle innovation here in the region. We don't want to make things so tight that we're not bringing people here, we're not encouraging the innovation. So we have to balance. We're on a balancing on what we need to do. We need to review our policies on where we have inputs already. We have ICT policies for CARICOM. We have education policies. We have our broadband strategies. So we need to see where we can align with initiatives and areas that are already here and update them. We need to look at our cyber crimes legislation and make sure that it is, again, future-proof. A lot of what we looked at was very dated. It wasn't at the tip of what's happening now. And that's another important point that we'll need to discuss. How do we keep ourselves active? How does the legislation keep up with the technology? Is there a bridge that we can put in place so that we can keep our legislations, our policy up to speed with our developments in technology? We may need new financial instruments. And we really need the fiscal and policy space to align our frameworks in each one of our countries. Mr. Schillingford just talked about they're doing their work in resiliency. I'm sure in other parts of our Caribbean region, we're doing a lot of really great work. We just need to now align them, put them together. In this area of transparency and accountability, we want to make sure that we know exactly what's in the black box. We do, we have to know what's going on in the black box. And we thought about creating a standards authority to evaluate and approve the deployment of proposed AI solutions. The one thing that I can say is we can't do this on our own. Every nation cannot go and do this. It's not going to scale. We're too small. We need scalability. And in order to scale, we have to come together. So the notion of the standards authority is to aggregate knowledge into a body. And so every nation could potentially come to this body and get advice about their AI implementations. What we're going for here is all of the classic things. We want to reduce the bias that we have in the AI systems. We definitely do not want any biased AI systems operating in our region. We don't want that. We want to make sure that we are implementing responsible AI strategies. We want to look at how we're going to enforce and deter. We want to look at how we're going to integrate, how we enable investment and trade in this area of governance. I'm going to stop here on this page to see if there's any feedback specifically on these 3 areas, and then we can go on to the next page, which has a few more areas under governance.
Hi, excuse, can I say something?
Sure, would you like to state your name and you can
Right.
speak?
Okay, I'm David Benjamin from Trinidad and Tobago. One of the things I notice is that very often as we define our mandates, we define them in the negative, from the potential pathologies. We started off talking about governance from the point of view of avoiding harm. But there are other things that I think we probably need to address in a more frontal way. One of them is simply corporate management and governance. What I have noticed is that artificial intelligence is being deployed at quite a rate in all kinds of organizations and all kinds of applications. And very often the corporate managers are way behind the curve. It's upon them before they realize what's happening. There isn't a program that ensures that corporate managers understand and can deal with and have the tools to deal with the AI issues that are going to come in front of them, right? There are a lot of issues like privacy, for example, which have to do with corporate management of data. And do some of these managers understand how that is to be handled? And that's what. So one of the things is, do we have some positive objectives, some positive mandates to build ourselves into what needs to be there to handle AI? Because the harms really may come from people not being prepared, not understanding, and not taking the actions that need to be taken.
Thank you so much for that feedback, sir. I can assure you there are tons of positive, and we really want to focus on the balance of this, you'll see, on the positive aspects of AI and what we're going to get from it, because that's really the value in deploying AI is all of the benefits. But we've got to put these roadblocks, we have to put these frameworks in place so that we can bound AI. And I do agree with you. I think that there is there needs to be an education campaign in corporate. As being a technologist, I know many times when we sell technology and people are buying it, they don't really know the inner workings. They just know what they want to address in their business problem. So I do agree there needs to be an education. This is why we may have these technical code of conducts. We have these standards that we're trying to implement, especially from a development perspective. So in the Caribbean, we're going to have implementers of the technology, and we hope that we're going to have creators of the technology. So we have to give them frameworks on how they should be working in the Caribbean. We're going to go through a ton of positive here, especially on the private sector side, and I'm looking forward to your feedback when that comes.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. State your name and then you may speak.
Yes, I'm Kimberly Samudo. I'm from Jamaica. Just to add to the gentleman said previously that it's going to be more reliant on the corporate management of things. And one thing that we have to factor in is the trust aspect of it, because from, not to be offensive or anything, but the fact of the matter is there is limited trust when it comes to AI and artificial intelligence, because what you recognize is that the psychological aspect of it, people just doesn't trust the idea of having robotics in the companies and overall, because they believe that you're not relating to a human per se. You understand? So the human relations with the human emotion is not there. But based on what I noticed, what is happening in Jamaica is that the government is taking small measures and small initiatives to kind of implement digitalization per se, into taking into consideration, for one, the Wi-Fi, incorporating Wi-Fi in most public places, that was one. Two, to kind of encourage the Jamaicans to kind of rely more on internet transactions. So when I look at, for example, like the small agencies like Tax Administration of Jamaica, looking across those government, you can see that they have implemented online basis. I hope that SID take into consideration that they have to emphasize more on building the trust of the nation, because you're going to lose as you start. And taking to a scenario what had happened that I read across in the Sunday Gleaner, that there was a breach in cybersecurity. I can't recall what I have read, but you have already, if there is a breach already in our country, in Jamaica, how you're gonna incorporate AI or AI into that aspect. So that is something that they really need to focus on. Yeah.
Well, thank you for saying that. Yeah, I think the governance is where we're going to have to put bounds around that. That breach happened because someone wasn't followed, the checklist wasn't followed for deployment. So yeah, the trust aspect, we are going to have to educate our entire region on the benefits of AI. And we are going to have to tell them about the risks as well. I'm hoping that if we're able to show some of the benefits coming out of this technology, that we can understand that we have to move forward in this area. It's not a choice. If we're looking for development, we have to look at this technology, this area, implement it to improve our own human condition here. We don't have a choice. And in that, there's risk in everything. But I think in this case, we have a great benefit to have outside of this. The risks are going to be there, but we have to go. Was someone else something?
Yeah, I agree. Somebody, can I go?
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I agree, Erica, because I like to give scenarios in comparison. So for example, like our two biggest telecommunication, it would be cable and wireless and digital. So customer service is something that I really voice. It's very important to me. So for instance, when I contact digital, I get, courtesy and everything, as opposed to when I contact cable and wireless. So it so happens that I share my experience with one of my relatives, and the person said to me, oh, well, Kimberly, digital is more automated. If you realize that when you speak to the person on the phone, it sounds more of a robotic nature, as opposed when you speak with somebody you speak with an actual person. So taking that into consideration, I said, okay, digital, truth and in fact, the customer services to me is way better than cable and wireless. So when I make the comparison, I understand that there is a need for artificial intelligence because it eliminates the emotional intelligence that most companies are stressed on. So if you eliminate emotional intelligence, automatically artificial intelligence, which I believe is very, in truth and fact, which is needed.
Yeah, thank you for that. Very, very well said. Was there another comment?
Yes, Erica. I wondered a couple of things listening to the comments. First of all, whether one of the points being made in relation to trust, and that's a very important one, is whether we specifically identify that in the deliverables, that is one of the deliverables, which is to enhance or to lift trust, or whether it is that we should find a way to stipulate that as a particular principle. Because the United Nations Secretary General says we're living in a time now of a very low trust quotient. And I think we also know that that's a particular governance challenge in our region, with or without justification, based on perception or reality, based on Transparency International Corruption Index, whatever it is. That is something that I think will be common throughout the region. So I want to flag that as something we ought to consider as a governance principle. Okay. And having said that now, just in terms of some categorization, so we are dealing with governance. Probably we might want to think about dealing with principles specifically, governance principles.
Okay.
Because the points raised about, where was it? I saw something about transparency, explainability, accountability.
Yeah.
Yes, right. So those are actually AI principles.
Mm-hmm.
So we might want to talk about principles and deal with transparency, explainability, accountability, trust, values, and so on.
Yeah, okay,
and standards as a specific subhead under governance, where we talk about IEEE as an example.
Great, thank you, Mr. Green. I agree with that. And that's important that we call that out. And I do think the standards, it does require its own line item.
Erica?
Yes.
Under legislation, we provide for soft laws. We provide for access to different things, internet, different things and so on. But under legislation, could we enshrine rights?
Human rights?
No, not just human rights. We already have human rights enshrined. But in developing a society where we undertaking, let's say now, AI to enhance life, right? Shouldn't we accept that this is a right, just like how we would say broadband access for everybody, internet for everybody, AI as a right for everybody going into the future?
I think that's a very interesting feedback. AI for good, I would say, as a right, right? Yeah, and you'll see some concepts about AI for good further down, but maybe we should move that under this area of governance and these rights. I do agree. That would make us a little bit different than the other regions, because my feedback, that the research that I've done, a lot of the other regions don't talk about AI for good as a right. So that would be something unique maybe that we can call out here in the Caribbean. And I would like to just share with everybody that we are looking for our uniqueness in here. We don't want to be like everybody else necessarily, because we want to have a unique voice. We want to have a voice maybe that isn't being communicated in any parts of the world. Are there any blind spots that have been missed in these policies that we as Caribbean people have a real value in? And we want to make sure that we have the difference. So I'm going to star that. I think AI as AI for good as a right is a very interesting concept.
Well, for starters, could we just add it? I mean, I think the point is introduce, and it's not just soft law, it's introduce laws, in brackets, soft and hard, to address harms, responsibility, liability, and rights.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah. All right, we can, absolutely. Okay. All right, let's keep going. I don't want us to lose our spot. Let's keep going. Under governance as well, here are 3 more areas. Safety and well-being. What is our strategy around safety and well-being of AI? We've talked about developing tests to make sure that AI is appropriate and doesn't harm people in the region. Can we develop a capability, a competence in that area? We also need to develop applications in need of governance. So we talked about deploying AI in the medical industry, in the law and justice system. But those applications of AI need boundaries, right? What are we going to use AI for? So we need to come up with maybe a safety and well-being index of applications and industry sectors and do the risk models for those. How can we use AI to defend human rights was another concept. And we need to establish innovations and frameworks for justice reform, law enforcement. Perhaps there's an online dispute resolution system for AI. What happens when we don't agree with AI or AI harms us? What is our recourse here in the region? Do we need to potentially mandate or make sure that there is manual override options within our AI systems, right? So for the safety and the well-being of the people in the region, what do we want to make sure that AI is doing? On the equity side for governance, of course, and we'll talk a little bit more about this, we have to have our infrastructure, our broadband infrastructure, our internet infrastructure, our storage infrastructure, our computing infrastructure, and we have to bring it to the region. We're not going to have equitable access to this new world of artificial intelligence unless we work on our infrastructure and we give access. We're at about maybe anywhere between 40 and 50% coverage on internet in our region. We have to have a push to get our broadband access, our framework, our platform for technology implemented. And in this area of equity, I want to also point out, in this plan, we want to focus a little bit and provide just a little bit of focus on women and youth. We have found out outside of the COVID epidemic that women are disproportionately affected by the pandemic because many women had to quit their jobs and stay home with their families. Youth as well have been totally displaced. Their entire education has been thrown off. So we want to make sure that we are targeting women and youth to bring us out of the pandemic and to make sure that we have specific programs to make sure that the technology access is equitable. And we need to create these machine learning algorithms that are equitable. So maybe this is where we can have youth, women, differently abled people being involved in the creation of these equitable algorithms. And then again, advocacy. We've got to start talking more. This is a great initiative that we're doing with UNESCO, the Caribbean. We have to continue to talk more amongst ourselves on this. And we also have to become involved in the global discourse. So how can we promote regional and global networks? And I know, Mr. Green, you had a comment about this. Are we creating another committee? Are we creating something new? Or do we need to highlight this as an area of focus for the existing committees and the existing networks that we have in place? I am thinking, and outside of the consultations, that we launch an international software developers conference, bring it to the Caribbean. When we bring global people here, just start talking. We could be the host. We can just be the host for the first year, bring people here, get them talking, and then it would be a tremendous educational opportunity for us in the region, and we can start to see how we can participate. There's not been an AI conference that's been based in the Caribbean yet. We know for AI, we've got about 6 or 7 big tech companies. 5 of them, I think 4 to 5 are located in the United States. I'm sure you can guess who these are. These are the Googles, the Facebooks, right? How do we get them interacting with us more on this? How do we show them that we're interested in this area and that we want to be a part of any conversation that they're having around governance? We need to start writing more papers on this topic. When I did the research, not a lot of papers being written by academics. There's probably like 5 of them out there. So we need to write more papers, right? On all of these areas, get our opinion out into the world and participate in global forums. I'm happy to say, and I know Mr. Green is representing us very nicely in a number of global forums where we can at least have our conversation. And we need to develop responsible AI training and policies. Maybe this is where on the training side, we can target the public and the private sector to increase, right, our awareness of AI. So we have to become better advocates. This is a great start over the last 2 years. We want to thank UNESCO for giving us that launch pad and the Broadcasting Commission of Jamaica for really bringing this forward, but we need more participation. I invite you to just say a few words on this slide. Also click the link and you can passively talk about. Is there anything in safety and well-being, in our area of equity, in our advocacy area that we have forgotten and need to address? LaToya, anybody online?
We don't have any hands raised yet.
Okay, let's keep going. We have lots to talk about.
All right, Erica, before you move on, and by the way, let me just make a point here that although the Broadcasting Commission is involved in this process, today we're just a participant.
Yeah.
So on the equity, where we have targeted recruitment, I think that we have to deal with the disabled community there. Okay. And it's probably targeted recruitment and empowerment we're talking about. And we're saying here that we want to put some emphasis on women, youth, and the disabled.
Right, and I'm calling it differently abled, Mr.
Yes, yes, quite so, absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you for that.
All right. Perfect. All right, let's keep going.
I just want to say thank you for keeping the terminology okay. I myself am a survivor of paralytic polio, so in the disabled movement. So yes, persons with disabilities.
Yes,
okay.
Yes, okay.
Yes, and I note that we did have someone, a differently able person, participate in our consultations and shared from your feedback, their feedback, what's needed. So thank you. Thank you for that acknowledgement. Okay, let's keep going. All right, so.
You're muted, Erica.
Sorry. This area focuses on what we need to do to transform ourselves in the public sector, how we can use AI, as Ms. Samuda, I think, was talking about earlier, to increase our efficiency programs, our citizen services. I think we have a huge opportunity in our public sector to implement these programs and to jumpstart our economic recovery outside of COVID. So on the public sector, we want to make sure that we are focusing on efficiency programs in crime, supporting crime in the region, AI to support education, AI to support our healthcare infrastructure that we have in the region, and of course to tackle our overwhelming problem of energy and energy efficiency. Our entire public sector needs to go to paperless. I just moved back to Jamaica a couple years ago, and I'm amazed by the big books that we still write things in our public
Erica, can I just interject at that point? I agree. I agree. Yes. I always ask myself this question: when Jamaica is going to be paperless? I always ask the amount of paper Jamaicans store on a periodical basis. I always wonder the same thing, just to add.
Yeah, it's amazing. I think we can get we're looking for development. We're looking for GDP push. We have to make it easier to work with our public sector. We have got to, and this is what I say, we've got to take the learnings that we have brilliantly mastered in the tourism sector for dealing with customer service, and we need to drive that horizontally across all of our service sectors, starting with the public sector. So how can we support Internet of Things innovation in the public sector? How do we enable this smart island infrastructure? And then how do we make sure that we can initiate and strengthen our alliances? How do we deal with maintenance, right? And we need public and private sector partnership here. When I'm talking about transformation of the public sector, it's really a private sector and a public sector opportunity to address some of the challenges that we have. Some efficiency programs, for example, that can be done is looking at patent and trademark examination. It's a very manual process here. Looking at how we manage traffic. I can say because we're home now, we don't have as many things happening with our school system. The traffic isn't as bad as it was, but how can we look at managing and forecasting our traffic better, right? How can we develop predictive capability for emergency responses, which is exactly what Mr. Shillingford talked about. So implementing AI and have assistants that are going to improve our citizen engagement and services, have websites that are updated. We have implemented the first level of our online presence, and now we need to improve it. Websites are not static anymore. It needs to be more of a more two-way sort of interrogation with websites. And how do we reduce the number of people that have to come into our brick and mortar services? I want us to all think about this area as an area where we can save a humongous amount of money. We're talking about saving money here, saving time. We also have this concept of this smart island infrastructure we want to talk about, which is a part of our transformation, and I touched on it earlier. I'm going to go from the bottom. We want to establish a regional computing cloud. Right now, we're using Amazon and a lot of the other US-based providers. They're charging us for accessing their cloud. They're charging us for accessing their computing resources. So we should think about, as a region, can we come together to establish a cloud? Can we come together as well as a region and invest in our internet infrastructure, our broadband, our Wi-Fi? I want to tell you that in IEEE, we're really advocating the 5G as a way to bring this smart island infrastructure forward. So we need to look in each country. Have we even began to look at 5G? Is there a way for us to aggregate, right, among the islands to implement this infrastructure? We need secure storage platforms. We need data centers in the region. That's how we're also going to make sure we have equitable access. We need local access to these resources. How can we align what we're doing with the tertiary institutions to facilitate R&D and promote innovation, right? We need to have this concept of maybe these hubs, these collaborative points where we can work regionally on these problems. We have actual Caribbean specific, very, very important data, right? That's not being reflected a lot in any of the training information out here. So how do we make sure that we can bring together all of our unique Caribbean information and have it be in a bank? So that when someone wants to do some research, they want to do some interrogation, they can come to us and we have our data and information there. How do we build these archives and how do we increase our data management capability? That is a huge opportunity for us. And I want to tell you that the data opportunity, we need to have standards governing our data and data licensing, because I think we have a lot of unique information here that's valuable, but we need to transform it. And we'll talk about that in a minute.
Erica.
Yes, sir.
Can we just do a little backtrack on 5G?
Okay.
In the OECS, we have the inventory for 5G, but it is not being sought, is not being demanded yet by the service providers who sell broadband to the public. Would it be, what would be the approach in, let's say, the other territories? Do we just go ahead and say 5G is available, we set the pricing, right? We do the bids for the service providers to get the bandwidth, and then regulate at what prices it goes out to the final customers? I mean, what should be the approach? Should be a push and pull, or let it be demand driven?
Well, I think that 5G, the private providers right now are not really motivated to push 5G. Remember, 5G is going to cost them some money, right? To deploy new infrastructure is going to be expensive. I also agree with you. I don't think we can wait on them. I think we have to incentivize the rollout of 5G in the region. And one way to do that is to push this smart island infrastructure, right? If we look at the Internet of Things, for example, if we're looking at our traffic system, and we're going to implement an IoT traffic system, which is sensors all along our roads, and we're collecting information, we have to have a smart infrastructure for that. We have to have 5G. We don't have a IoT or a smart island infrastructure without going to the next generation of our telecom technology, right?
What you're saying is that the state can implement it initially.
I think if we come together as a region, we can't do it individually. It won't work individually, right? But maybe we can come together as a block and say that we want to go to 5G because we want to enable our transformation. We're looking at public sector and private sector transformation, and we won't get to these things without it. So
can we have that statement embedded in the policy for adoption by the governments?
A group, a collaborative approach to the rollout of our telecom and our other infrastructure, because it's not just 5G.
Yeah.
It's going to be our storage sites.
Yeah.
Where we're going to keep all this data. We don't want to keep it out of our region. I don't think we want anybody owning our data in another region, just in case we have a hurricane or something and we can't get to it. We have countries that are spread out in the region. We could have data centers in the north. We could have one in the south. So spreading out our storage. And also once we start to create artificial intelligence, we're going to need computing resources. And this is where it gets really expensive. So this is why we have to see how we get some graphical processing units, some GPUs into the region so that we can control our costs on our innovation using AI. Because we need GPUs to train AI systems. So if we're going to come up with some new AI systems, we're going to have to train them, and it's very expensive to use resources out of our region. I'm hoping that what you're hearing, Mr. Shillingford, is a call for our regional development in this area, and we have to now come together to make sure we have our infrastructure, our storage, our processing power in the region. That's really the foundation. We don't have no AI if we don't fix this foundational issue, right? AI is just a theory for us, but we have to get we have to get our infrastructure right. And right now, it's a huge opportunity. And I agree, it has to be public and private partnership, and we have to nudge our private sector providers. And you're right, maybe we put out a call for providers, and we might get some new providers in the region. Who knows? Who knows, right? Okay, is there any other comments on transformation? Anything we left off? This is a very, very important principle in terms of our economic development. Because if we,
can I just say, with respect to the government side of it, I mean, I've been involved in a few government systems reform initiatives, and in Trinidad, for example, the record has been pretty spotty in that we have done a lot of transformations which have been very successful, as you might see in the Attorney General's office, the land registrar, all of the registries and that sort of thing. We've also had success, for example, in simple things like creating electronic records of the cabinet minutes and cabinet notes and so on. But very interestingly, sustainability tends to be an issue. So for example, when they made the whole cabinet records electronic, everybody became addicted to the system. It was so amazing that we can go all the way back to 1956 and get any cabinet note you want. And then some years passed, the people who were initially trained left, the system wasn't properly maintained. And the next thing you know, there's a piece of software that's sitting there, but the system has broken down, right? So when you thought that you had on the other hand, people are now becoming addicted to some of the new systems that are being put in place in like the registries and so on. And yet there are other areas in which nothing is happening at all. So for example, my area has been financial. I've been involved with the financial management reform for Trinidad. And Trinidad does not yet have an integrated financial management information system, which interestingly enough is something that most islands of the Caribbean do have, right? Simply because they have no choice. When the international agencies say, you need to do this for accountability, they do it. Trinidad doesn't have to follow what international agencies say all the time. But there are several issues in here. One of them is getting people to support the initiative. Do the people in the public service have the confidence and, well, let me just put it this way, the lack of fear about some of these new initiatives that will allow them to go along and cooperate with the implementations? Do we have the project management to handle some of these big things? One of the things that I've seen fall down, for example, is the attempt to introduce a national health card to take care of the Ministry of Health's mandate. And that has involved all kinds of costs, all kinds of time, and still has not succeeded, has broken down at some point in time or another. There's the issue of training. And even when you have adoption, there's, as I said, with respect to the cabinet, you have the problem of sustainability. And sustainability is affected by things like the private sector poaching staff from the government. In the IT area, iGovTT, which is the government's state enterprise, which handles, I've just seen some advertisements by them and an interview by their CEO, and there is that complaint. It's great when we develop these people, we develop these systems, we develop these capabilities, but then tomorrow the private sector steals all the good people. Yeah. And so there's an issue there as to how do we actually have this thing sustained over time, all right? But I like the idea of how you very quickly recorded some of the real benefits of going this route, because people tend to forget that there are real, there are fantastic benefits to be gained from introducing electronic platforms and electronic processes. And so one of the issues though is that the question, I'm hearing you talk about data and needing to have ownership of our data. And I think it's an area that people don't understand. So for example, governments have jumped onto the cloud system, software as a service, all the rest of it. Big time on all the big platforms. We use Microsoft systems a lot. And they don't realize that the laws that exist in some of these countries, which say that government data, especially critical government data, ought not to be domiciled out of island or off the territory, are automatically being breached by the use of these systems. Now, if you're going to use those systems, data has to go back and forth to them. However, one of the things I've been trying to say for a while is it does not mean that you ought not to have your data domiciled here as a live echo of whatever data is going back and forth to your cloud provider. And people don't understand that, and they don't understand the risks of that. And you made it very simple just now when you talk about, where we have a storm and, we can't get it. But it's a very dangerous thing, partly because where it goes to is a different jurisdiction. It's a different legal environment. It's a different set of rights that apply. The things that you think may apply to you and your data here may not apply to you and your data across there. And so again, these are things that I'm really glad I'm hearing them being highlighted, because in real life where I work here, very often they're not understood and they're not taken care of.
Erica, we have Sophia Wellington waiting, and then we have Gordon Swaby.
Okay, wonderful. Ms. Wellington, thank you for those comments. We're going to talk about upskilling sustainability on the next slide. And I have some ideas for that, but you're right. We do have to worry about how we're going to sustain the talent that we need in this area. Okay, next speaker, please.
Sophia.
Good morning. Good morning, colleagues. And let me just start off by saying this is a wonderful exercise. I'm interested so far. My only gap is I'm not seeing the financial component. AI is useful, however, we know it's an expensive undertaking. So I think we need a strategy, and I don't know if it's coming up, mind you, we need a strategy around how it is that the Caribbean countries will be able to deploy these technologies, sustain them, as you just said. And I'm not seeing that so far in this presentation. I would love a more practical application of this workshop to those kinds of questions. The value of AI is, I mean, we don't have to debate that, but it is going to be an expensive undertaking.
Yeah, okay, we can note that. You know, we'll make sure that we figure out a way to pay. So I've actually been talking about aggregation. I've said throughout the seminar that we're going to have to invest, and I'm saying that we can't invest individually because we don't have the scale. So
yeah.
we do need to think about how we're going to pay for this, and we need to think about how we're going to do it as a region.
Right.
So, Erica,
hold on just a second, Kimberly, before you.
Okay. No, I just wanted to add something. That's all.
Yes, I know. But we have Gordon waiting. I just wanted him to comment, and maybe Gordon can give a spin on the financial side as well.
Okay, no problem.
Afternoon, everybody. Gordon, Jamaica. Yeah, so just to follow up in terms of, I think, Mrs. Simmons' comments, I think there have been quite a few initiatives, and I do applaud the recognition of infrastructure as a key issue for us, because I know you have had groups like Caribbean Network Operators Group, which have been pushing deployment of IXPs and various spin-offs arising from that. Also, in relation to infrastructure, I believe that the development of telecoms in the Caribbean, I've seen where you may have probably a particular infrastructure like a SMS server serving a few islands. So we've been doing these things. So I think it's for us to kind of organize on the priorities, see where, you know, you have various other regional entities already doing some stuff. We can get that type of synergy. And also, I think the role of our regional education institutions are very key. And one particular issue I think that is important is the whole issue of IP and in terms of that whole development there, and even recognizing some of the students and their work so you can propel them to do even more. Because I've seen sometimes a student may have a project, but because he may not get no recognition and it may go to the school, he just probably does submit a part of it, you know, and not give it the whole. So you don't get that type of development because there's no confidence in the sense of how his final product will emerge. So I think for us, we have a few things to put together, but things are already on the ground. So it's how we go forward and ensure that we have all the pieces go together. All right, thanks much.
All right, thank you for that, Gordon. Yeah, we have lots of desperate initiatives across the island. So we have to coordinate because again, we are spending too much money and we're just creating point references of knowledge. So I do agree we need to aggregate, and we also need to find the best practices. The gentleman spoke about all the amazing things that they're doing in Trinidad with their IT. So we should determine what's working, and if it works in Trinidad and some of the other countries, how do we deploy it across the other islands? How do we use some of the same knowledge and understanding across all the other islands? So you're right, we have a lot of aggregation and collaboration to do. It's the desperate nature of all of these initiatives all over the place. That's the challenge.
So Kimberly had a final, a quick comment, go ahead.
Yeah, so basically, Eric, you has been pointed that there needs to be a collaboration with the public sector and the private sector to drive this initiative, because what I recognize in Jamaica per se is that the private sector is kind of ahead in terms of digitalization as opposed to the public sector. So what I realize in the public sector, there's kind of a lag there. You can see that they are trying to push, because I noticed, as Mr. Gordon would say, there has been initiatives, but I believe a stronger collaboration with the private sector would more drive AI initiative. Because what I recognize, for example, I'm going to use NCB, for example, because what I recognize now, they're basically encourage their employees to be more technical savvy, because majority of the positions that I know that they're currently advertised, you have to have some IT base. As you look at it now, the workforce, if you look across globally, most of these current job roles that you see now, they're going to be obsolete. So I believe that the collaboration with the public sector and the private sector will more drive this initiative more than anything else, I believe.
Wonderful, yeah. Thank you for that. And you're segueing into the next section, if I can move on in the interest of time. And that's really to talk about this upskilling, our education. How are we going to transform? We do know that there's going to be obsolescence in jobs, but there's a document that says that there's going to be so many job losses as a result of implementing these technologies, that there's also going to be a tremendous amount of new jobs created. So this area of upskilling, how are we going to transform? How are we going to get that sustainability that we talked about? And I have some ideas on this one. So we need, on the upskilling side, we've got to focus on innovation and monetization, because as Gordon said, we've got to incent people. We got to get people excited about solving some of the problems that we have. So on the innovation side, we need to establish regional AI incentives for academia to collaborate together. We have several tertiary level institutions in the region, and they may be collaborating independently. So how do we make sure that we can bring academia and the private sector and the public sector together to start working? You talked about sustainability. I am a wonderful advocate for democratization of the digital age. This means that we can't have these high-level technical people only controlling the knowledge and controlling these systems. We have to figure out a way to democratize it to women, youth, and differently abled people. And I'm going to show you some ideas on how we could do that. We need to create public education on media and information literacy, just like the awesome video that we saw in the beginning from the Broadcasting Commission of Jamaica. And I would like to say that that video is right on my level. I just need a video at that level to understand what's going on. Perhaps we need to create this R&D fund, Regional AI Tech Fund. All countries contribute to it. And it's really to spur innovation, to allow people to get these new skills that they need. And we need to strengthen alliances, our strategic alliances, both within the region, with our people, our universities, and then also outside of the region. How do we bring the experts to the Caribbean so that they can work with us? Somebody's got their phone open, so if you could mute. We need to establish some new AI-assisted industries, right? So medical cannabis, how do we implement AI so that we can really build an industry around medical cannabis, for example? Our healthcare sector in the region, we got to work on that, people. I think AI implementation, making sure that we can have a better, strengthened, stronger healthcare system is something that we have to do in the region, and AI would be great for that. Our education sector, oh my God, what are we going to do now? We have to build back. We have to come back. Will we ever be able to come back in the way in the education sector in the way that we had in the past, right? We have billion-dollar industries, esports. We have agriculture and mariculture as being new sectors that we could launch here, regenerative agriculture. And then is there a concept of well-being management? People come to the Caribbean to relax and to have fun and to really get a lot of spiritual vibration. So is there something around this industry of well-being management that we could use AI as a lever to develop the industry? And we have got to make sure that we drive AI horizontally across all of our industry sectors, our manufacturing sector. We have a lot of the big top players implementing AI, but then how do we get that down in the small, medium, and micro size manufacturing sector, right? Criminal justice. I read that clients are in jail for almost 2 years waiting to get a trial. I'm sure we can implement AI to improve that. And we had actually some examples of how this is being implemented in Brazil, right? So how do we drive AI across financial services sector and the creative industries? So what is the innovation strategy? We need to have people focused on upskilling themselves with technology to enable innovation with AI. And then let's talk about money and monetization and how do we make money on all of this? Because nobody wants to talk about this if we're not talking about how we generate, economics. So there are a couple of areas. Once we get our innovation plan in place, we could look at developing AI bias test software. We're a very diverse region. We have lots of different ethnic backgrounds and women and disabled people and people that speak different languages. It gives us a perspective maybe that other people may not have. So could we develop a competence in this bias test software? We need to develop efficient AI training because it's very expensive right now to train these new algorithms. So can we have a focus on how do we do this in the most efficient way? We need to look at how we are going to digitize our creative and environmental content. I was speaking about this. This speaks to our revenue generation. We have lots of creative content and environmental content, again, that's not in the right format to be consumed by AI. It's in an analog format. It's not in the right format. I think this is a perfect area where we can target women, youth, and differently abled people. In Jamaica, we have an open data portal, but if you go on the open data portal, the data is not in the right format. So can we get people back to work, fixing our data, cleaning our data, making it available for use? That is a new job in the 21st century. And I know that we have women, youth, and differently abled people that can do that job. And how do we develop digital content now? Content is all the rage. We're going to need content for education. We should be developing a whole new range of digital content. We can use our creative industries to help us create this content. So in this area of upskilling, we need to train, we need to retire old jobs, get new skills, and we need to figure out how we're going to make money in this digital economy using artificial intelligence. I invite you now to comment on this area of upskilling. How do we incent, for example, the private sector to work with academia? Is it the tech fund that we talked about? How do we incent both the private and the public sector to work more with women on transforming their skills? How do we do that? So I'll invite some comments on this slide for the moment. This is a very, very important one because it speaks to the sustainability, right? And we have to democratize this. It can't be at the upper echelons in our society, unfortunately, right? We're gonna have people and engineers and different people operating at the very, very top, but we have to get everybody involved in creating data, cleaning data, and getting data ready for the future. So I'll stop there. LaToya, any questions on upskilling? Anybody care to offer a few words here?
Well, we don't have a question yet, but I note a comment from Paula UNESCO asking us to use the term people with disabilities versus differently abled. I'll also invite Patrick Lafayette, who's here. Patrick can also weigh in on that, just to ensure we're using the correct terms. But other than that, I haven't seen any questions yet.
Patrick, hello, and Paula, your comment is noted. Patrick, I don't know. Please tell us how should we be referring to you? And this is in the Caribbean context, remember. So what would we call you, Patrick?
I think as soon as he...
Patrick, we call him Patrick.
Yeah, we call him Patrick with the voice, with the silky voice. I love that voice. I loved it.
Well, Patrick has not yet opened his mic. So as soon as he has, I'll
I'm so sorry. I was having
the correct terminology is person with disability.
Persons with disabilities. Yes, indeed.
Right.
Yes. This is Patrick once again. So sorry about that.
Thanks, Patrick. I love that voice. And I will note that. Persons with disabilities. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you, Paula.
Thanks, Paula.
And Patrick.
Okay, so let's keep going. Let's keep going. We need to upskill. We can use women, youth, and persons with disabilities to help us in this area.
David has posted a question. What is the scale of resources required to deploy widespread training?
Well, we have to start looking at our academic resources across the region, right? We have to start looking at our resources, such from organizations like the Broadcasting Commission. We have lots of resources, again, spread out, and we need to aggregate those resources because we shouldn't necessarily be doing, again, when necessary, country by country education, but we have to figure out a way to scale this very quickly. So we have to look at all of the places where training already occurs and determine how we can integrate, how do we start some specific focuses on this area of AI.
I think though, Erica, that was the point of Sophia Wellington's intervention. So I just want to remind us about it as we come to monetization and the question that was just posed. And I think she's flagging that we have to, in the strategy, in the roadmap, specifically address the question of mobilization and how we're going to engage with external and internal stakeholders, including the multilaterals. So to the point of coordination and so on, but it really goes to the question of a strategy. So I noted that as an important intervention.
Great, awesome. Okay.
And for completeness, we are increasing productivity across sectors because the criminal justice isn't really an industry per se.
Well, that was just an example, but
yes, I appreciate that.
We can make sure we say sectors for sure. Okay. All right, let's keep going. We have two more areas to discuss. This area is about preservation of our cultural identity, our cultural assets, our geoheritage assets that we have in the region. And we should be looking at a strategy to capture our capture, store, preserve, and monetize our cultural data and information. So on the data capture side, we can establish these preservation programs. We could make sure that we are launching these regional banks to be able to hold cultural data and information. And of course, we can recruit and train youth and creatives to handle data. One example, very simply, is that we have a lot of geoheritage sites. We could get our youth to go out there and catalog them, take pictures of them, capture characteristics if they're not already captured of these sites. And this is a way to get them involved. We're going to have a lot of data. Data is going to be big. So we, again, need a national and regional storage strategy. And again, on the storage side, we can also train data on how to make sure that they are uploading their content in a standard way to these sites. There's a lot of data already out there. We have national archives, we all do in our countries. How do we take that data, which is basically analog right now, and prepare it in a machine readable format? So we need to classify, label, archive, and manage our cultural content. And again, that's a great job for our youth, women, and people with disabilities to be able to work on. Once we've captured, stored, preserved the data, now we can again look at how we monetize our preservation efforts. How do we create augmented reality experiences using our cultural data? How do we increase the financial literacy around this area of monetization and innovation? We need to let people know, even the creatives at the ground floor level, that there is economic upside in focusing on the preservation, and it's the digital preservation and the digital classification and labeling of our cultural data and information. One potential project we could do is engage on 3D mapping of our Caribbean small island developing states capitals. A great example of sort of, we heard during our consultations is what's happening with the Kingston Creative and what they're doing in downtown Kingston to digitize experiences and capture different places around our capital in Kingston that's important. I think that would be a really great project. And I think this is where we can also get some women, youth, and people with disabilities working in this area. Because really it's, you know, taking our cameras, our phones, going out and capturing the information, making sure that when we are uploading it, we're structuring the information, we're adding the right labels to the data, right? Once we have this data captured and preserved in a digital way, we should be able to monetize it. We can begin to see how we can use it to train different AI systems and to really bring some monetization. We have lots of value locked up in our national archives that I think we can digitize and let loose. So any questions on this area of preservation? Any comments here? This is an area where I think we're unique. I have not seen this area in many of the other AI principles. I think it speaks very specifically to the importance of our cultural history, our cultural assets, and how we're going to bring them forward into the digital age. LaToya, any questions? Anybody care to comment on this? How do we get our creatives involved in the digital realm? How do we digitize their artwork? How do we make their artwork catalogable, archivable, searchable?
Okay, I think Patrick would like to share, and then
ownership is a situation that I'm curious about, because nothing occurs without data, content, and ownership of content will be an issue. One cannot just arbitrarily take pictures, of course not. And what it is that we do archive, we also have to lend credence to ownership, because inevitably there will have to be value placed. And when value is placed, then inevitably there'll be room for earnings. Who earns, who shares, who gets?
Yeah, I agree with that, Patrick. We actually have to work on that some more. And there's actually two forms of data, right? There's National Archive data that's in our public national archives. So there's a body of already created data that has been attributed to artists. We're going to protect that intellectual property, and that's going to become part of the record that we keep. The classification, the labeling of that piece of asset. We have another huge opportunity, which is in the creation of new assets, or the digitization of existing assets by creatives and other people that are creating. And how do we, and that's a larger discussion, we need a business model around how are we going to ensure that people are in charge of their intellectual property and how can they monetize it? Right? So in this discussion, we have existing assets that need to be preserved and digitized. We also have an opportunity to create new cultural assets that would be owned by the individual. And a lot of that has to do with our IP laws that we have in the Caribbean. And we probably do need to review those to see where we are.
Yes, Erica, I know there's some experimentation, or what I would call experimentation, going on in this area, because you might have seen the recent upsurge in people using what they call non-fungible tokens based on blockchain technology to create creative works in digital form. But I don't think everybody is quite comfortable about what it's all about yet, what it means for ownership, whether it's running ahead of, whether the technology is running ahead of the IP laws, what, you know. I myself, I'm still not sure as to what the implications of this is ultimately, but it's becoming very popular in some circles.
I'm loving the NFTs and I'm trying them myself. The one thing that we have that's really great about the NFTs is that it's based on blockchain technology. So your ownership of your artwork or whatever type of NFT you're created is inextricably linked to you and in the blockchain, and you get to dictate what your price is. So for every time your asset is sold, you're taking 10% of it. And that's gonna stay with the artwork on the blockchain. We have some new exciting technologies that I don't think that we understand fully yet. And the NFTs is certainly one of those. I know that the IP stays with the creator of the NFT. We have a ton of artwork out here that can be turned into NFT by local artists. I think this is a tremendous opportunity for us at the moment.
Excellent.
Okay, so preservation, that's a unique area that we're putting forth as the Caribbean. We got some unique content here. We're not gonna let anybody take it from us. We're gonna preserve it, classify it. We're going to see how it can be monetized, and we're also going to encourage other people to create new content that can be monetized. And NFT is a great one, and I'll add this to it because it's under the data monetization. I think it's an important area that we might want to look at here in the region.
Yes, so Erica, you'll be adding NFT and ownership. And just to remind everyone that even if you don't get to share under each principle, the feedback forms are in the chat. You can just click and leave your feedback on each principle area that is covered.
Thank you, Latoya. Okay, so now we're gonna go to our last slide, our last principle, which is all about sustainability and how we use AI to enable our sustainability. There are two areas under here. One is service to humanity. So how do we make sure that AI is always used as a tool, that we can establish a network to govern it so that it is used for service of humanity? How do we make sure that we have these data banks? What kind of structural improvements do we need to make so that we can have AI be of service? And how do we digitize a lot of our operations? The second area is very specifically with the UN Sustainable Development Goals, right? We are, as a region, we are lacking in this area. We have never been able to attain the goals that we've set out for ourselves in this area. So how can we enable AI to implement programs in reducing poverty in the region? How do we develop clean energy and use AI to enable clean energy and lower the cost of energy, right? AI is going to be used in, for example, our utility microgrids in the future. They're going to be balancing all of the loads. So how can we use renewable energy and AI to really reduce our cost of energy? And women and youth are disadvantaged in their economic development, including people with disabilities. So how do we enable economic development so that we can attain our global goals? The gender gap, it's getting wider. The digital gender gap is getting wider. So how do we reduce that? How do we make sure that we can upgrade our systems, implement automated decision-making so that we can make things more equitable, and again, just upgrading our systems. We're going for cultural preservation, predictive analytics, and our sustainable development with this one. So any feedback on how we apply AI to reach the sustainable development goals set out by the United Nations and other nations, including many in our region. Any comments on this? Can we use AI for sustainable development?
Sure, we don't have a choice. That's a default position.
I know, that's what I'm thinking too. I mean, you know, we've got little and littler. So I think it's a great opportunity for artificial intelligence for the future of our region. And I believe that we have to come together now to demand the digital transformation, to be very smart about how we're going to implement these systems, to think about our industry sectors that we want to enable, and to figure out how we use it to really attain the economic development, the equality that we have been, that's been so elusive in our region. How do we use it to fight crime, for example, which is one of our principles on happy lives and happy living?
I think, Erica, in some of what you've been saying earlier, I think it's already implied that we have to tether AI to some specific SDGs. The ones that come to mind immediately would be Goal 1, which is about ending poverty, Goal 8, which is about decent work, Goal 9, which is about promoting inclusive and sustainable industrialization and fostering innovation, Goal 10, which is about reduction of inequality and promotion of inclusion for all, and Goal 16, which is about promoting peaceful and inclusive societies. So I think it is beyond doubt. The only thing I would say is that the bullet automate decision making, we would probably need to qualify it, because we'd be talking about probably fair automation, or ensuring that automation of decision making is fair, because there's a lot of fear, F-E-A-R, in the idea of AI involvement in decision making around, especially in relation to the judiciary. So we would just need to qualify it.
Okay. Okay.
And probably, if we want, get a bit granular with the sustainable development goals.
Yes, I've noted the ones that you've just said. And I'll also note that we're not going to include the climate change, because maybe we'd include that in our resiliency area, right?
Yes, Patrick?
One of the things I think I'd like to add to from Cordell, it's also identifying the resources. We have certain natural resources in our community as persons with disabilities. For example, blind folks, they have a power of hearing. And a lot of these blind folks have a power of creativity. It's usually a natural thing to see a blind person doing music, yeah? And this is a natural resource that we possess. Additionally, no one talks like blind people. You give them a telephone, they'll sit on it the whole year. Some of these natural things that we do naturally could be focused on and monetized in a great way. And through AI and through AI access, we are better able to do things with more fluidity, with more productivity, and with more completion. So as a natural resource, the people themselves and this particular community or group of people, which is oftentimes ignored. And I must tell you, if you have a disabled person in your household, a great part of your economy is determined by that person. So if that's so great a factor, I don't think we should be ignored in the whole scheme of things. One of the things that we're trying to do within our own community is assess our own value and our own place in this whole scheme of the new paradigm that we have to exist in. So ultimately, we are placing value on ourselves and ourselves as data. And ourselves as data, we're trying to find the most effective and let's say economically viable way we can present ourselves to earn within this new paradigm.
Thank you for that, Patrick. And I think that was a very powerful statement. I do feel like we need to have a collaborative session about what the value is that the different audiences can bring to the table. I know that audio is a growing area of artificial intelligence. So the fact that we have power over hearing our people that are blind is a very important benefit to us. So how do we take that power and transform it into something that can be monetized? I'm hearing you loud and clear on that. And that's not on disabled people. It would be for youth and women as well. What can we bring to the table here? And I think it's going to require a collaborative discussion, but I have noted these areas that you just discussed, Patrick, and I'll make sure that I have them integrated. So the human—
Erica, may I just ask a question in relation to Patrick, because he's raising a point that I have never heard articulated quite this way before. And as a matter of fact, I strongly want to urge that we disaggregate it from women and youth, which is usually about empowerment and equality. I've heard a point being made here that has to do with the capacity, not even enhancing the existing capacity of persons with disabilities that we are not leveraging for economic development. And so what I want to suggest is that on the service to humanity, I'm not conclusive on it, but that for the moment we explore a specific bullet point, which is around leveraging the capacity of persons with disabilities. That's what I deduced from what he said in relation to AI specifically to the Caribbean and to that group of stakeholders, quite apart from enhancement considerations and fair and equity considerations. There's an economic opportunity that is being missed.
Excellent. I've noted that.
Right on the button, sir. Salute.
Definitely.
Salute.
Okay, any other comments? This is our last area. So this means that after this slide, we've concluded. So, and we will have our links open as well so that you can continue to input if you've missed any opportunity. Is there anything else to add on this one? LaToya, anybody else in the chat?
Yes.
Yes.
I'm a big defender of agriculture being always in the loop. I would say that implement programs leveraging AI in agriculture development.
Okay, Mr. Shillingford, I'll note that. And I'll also say that AI for agriculture is included in the other section where we talked about modernizing existing industries that have been, mainstays of our region. But maybe we'll see how we can add some more to bring that out a little bit more.
Yeah, can I say that another UN agency, the FAO, as you just completed a 4-day program on digital technologies in climate smart agriculture. There's quite a lot of work that has been and is being done in that area that I suppose the UN agencies can collaborate on, or maybe already doing that.
Thank you for that. And I'll note that because part of the roadmap as well, I know that Mr. Green asked for this before, would be links to examples of those types of programs, right? So this is a roadmap, high-level framework, and we can certainly refer people to these really great examples of these programs that are being implemented in the region. And we can also see how we scale. How do we take something that's working really well in a particular country and make sure that we can share that expertise across different islands?
Okay, Patrick, you had your mic open and then you closed it. I wasn't sure if you wanted to.
No, I beg your pardon. That was an accident. I'm so sorry.
All right.
Awesome. Okay, so here are the links to the feedback forms. I think LaToya has dropped them all in the chat. We are still open to taking feedback on this. Provide your links, provide your feedback so that they can be incorporated, and we will be looking at everything. Well, Mr. Green, that is the wrap up of our first session, our first feedback session on our roadmap. I wanted to just thank everybody for your active participation today, and I'm looking forward to incorporating all your feedback in this.
Well, thank you very much, Erica. I think we should point out too that we are inviting feedback generally on the draft. So apart from the link that is around the specific areas that we touched on today, the text itself is open to examination, and that's key. So whatever value can be added to that, it would be welcomed. And I think we would be talking about, is it a week's time? Is it 7 days? Erica? You're muted.
Yeah, the team, we talked about a week after this, we would incorporate the feedback and have our next rev of this available.
Oh, okay, great. So we invite you to take another look at the roadmap. We have just posted the email in the chat. Go through it, please, line by line, and come with your constructive comments, because I think what we're all committed to is to not just prepare and have one of the other thousands and thousands of documents that we write up on all kinds of things that end up on a shelf, usually because people can't even bother to wade through all the technicalities and legalese. We really want this to become a live instrument that can be used not just by policymakers, and that's a key thing to underscore, because although it says policy roadmap, one of the aspects of AI that we have to note and emphasize, and which is informing the approach where UNESCO is promoting, is human centricity. And so regular people like us, because I count myself in that category, because there are only a few real experts around. I mean, a lot of us are on a learning curve and are taking an interest in this technology simply because we have learned from history that we have had waves of revolutions and opportunities, and we have pretty much been left behind. In other words, we write about them and we read about them, but we are not true participants. And here is an opportunity for an equalizer if we make use of the opportunity. So this is not meant to be a document that is highly technical and you need to be some AI expert to understand this. Otherwise, we would be defeating the purpose. AI and the internet would be like together another domain, like air, sea, and land in a sense. And we don't need to be experts to engage around preservation of land and dealing with purification of air to avoid pollution, and also maintaining and preserving marine life. And we would hope the same would apply to this domain. So digital literacy of our people is key. And the outcome of the AI initiative should go a long way in helping with that digital literacy. So as you read through this, it's really meant for you as it is meant for our leaders. So if you read it and you see gaps in it, please let us know so we can improve the document. And that's actually, I think, Isabel, we expect to be an ongoing activity, that every 2 years at most, we would be coming back to be looking at the roadmap so we keep it alive. Is Isabel still on? I'm not seeing her, but I think she is.
Yes.
Great. I would just invite you, Isabel, to make any final remarks on UNESCO's part.
Yes, thank you, Cordell. Are you hearing me?
Yes, we are.
Okay. So, well, I believe we had a great discussion this morning. I want to thank again Broadcasting Commission, Cordell, your team, also Erica, you did a great job. I believe we considered and discussed very important principles here, and each one of them covering a large number of very important and concrete issues. So I do think that we will be certainly able to gather, that we were certainly able to gather the very valuable inputs and comments from all participants. And this brings me to anticipate that we will have an excellent output from the workshops today, namely the Caribbean Artificial Intelligence Policy Roadmap. So that's it. Looking forward to the next meetings. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Isabel, and thank you to you and your team at UNESCO as well. You've really been excellent partners in this process. And most of all, thank you all for taking time out of your busy schedules and being here at 8 o'clock this morning. You know, there's a lot of heavy lifting and work that's involved. Just yesterday, Patrick Lafayette was on a panel with the Carnegie Council in New York, and it's AI for Equality initiative representing the Caribbean on these matters, and we have to continue this process. And so we are most grateful to you for the time that you have taken out of your very busy schedules to apply your intellect, your wisdom to this process, which really is about us after all. So we are doing what we ought to do for ourselves in the context of sustainable development. Have an excellent day, and we will be coming back to you as we improve this roadmap, and we ask you to be proselytizers of this process. Let people know that this is going on in the Caribbean and that they ought to take an interest in it. And the UNESCO Caribbean office has a website on this initiative. The Broadcasting Commission also has a website. So you can feed into the website whatever is going on in your sphere on AI. Whatever is going on, a session, a paper, just feed it to us so that it gets onto the website and we have a resource that's available to our people for our development. Have an excellent day, all.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a good day.